Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This video is the first in a two-part or maybe even longer series on FACGCE tuning. This tuning is an extremely popular one in math rock and emo music, and if you need an example, take a look at American football's song Never Meant. In this video, I'll show you guys my approach to writing an FACGCE with a focus on how to orient ourselves in the tuning. And by orient, I mean things like figuring out what key we should plan in relation to the open notes of the tuning, what frets of the fretboard are in the key, and also what chords can we use. So for today's video, we'll focus on key and what notes we can use in FACGCE. In the next video, or part 2 of this series, I'll show you guys some chord voicings that you can use around the neck and some writing strategies that you can employ to get the most out of the tuning. Anyways, before we start, I just want to preface by talking a little bit about why we should orient ourselves and also my philosophy of writing in alternate tunings in general. Okay, so if you're wondering why we should orient ourselves, this is useful because it allows us to essentially play diatonically to the open notes of the tuning. So orientation basically gives us positions or reference points which we can use to build scales, chords, and chord progressions in the key based on the tuning. It also allows us to recognize things like where the bass notes of the key are on the fretboard. Additionally, taking an oriented approach also allows us to avoid relying purely on the harmonic color of the tuning. For instance, one thing I notice with people who compose in alternate tunings using mostly their ear or noodling techniques is that the stuff they tend to write often relies way too much on the harmonic color of the tuning or the open notes, and this often tends to make things sound bland or very much the same. But that being said, it's still fun to be a little bit ignorant when we write in alternate tunings, but it does help a lot to have a few reference points to guide our sound and inform us of what we're doing. So basically, what I'll teach you today and over the course of the next few videos will help you to avoid blandness and control your color. If we're able to control our harmony, this will give us access to more melodic diversity and by extension more access to different moods. The first thing I do when decoding an alternate tuning is I figure out what key to play in that will best utilize the open notes of the tuning. And since I tend to find that math rock and emo harmony focuses on chords built off of the 4th degree of the diatonic major scale, I usually treat the chord produced by the open notes as being a chord built off of the 4th degree of some major scale. So in FACGCE, the open chord which sounds like this is going to be a chord which has a relationship to the major scale. And here I'm treating the open notes of the tuning as a chord based off of the 4th degree of some major scale. So the question now is to figure out what root pitch this major scale is based on. So let's take a look at the notes of this chord. We have F, A, C, G, C, and E. This basically equates to a big F major 9 chord. And what this means is we have a chord basically built off of the note F, which is the 4th degree of something. So to figure out what it's the 4th degree of, all we have to do is go down a perfect 4th to find out what the root note of the scale is. So let's try this out, moving a perfect 4th down from F to see what note we land on. So we go from F to E to D to C. So since we landed on C, this C is going to be the root note for our key. So when we play in FACGCE tuning, we should play in C major. And if we're playing in C major, this means we want to do things diatonic to the key of C. This means playing scales based off the key of C, building chords based off the key of C, and building chord progressions based on the key of C. Okay, so to summarize that last example, we found the key of our tuning by going down a 4th from the chord produced by the open notes of the tuning. In this case, from F to C, so we're playing in C major. So for this next example, we're going to want to find out the bass notes that are diatonic to the key of C. So what I'm talking about here are the notes in the key of C that are available on the first 2 strings of the guitar. As a side note, ideally we would want to know the notes on each string of the guitar, but for practical purposes, we can get away with knowing just the first 2. So why is this? Well, we usually build chords where the root note is based off of a note on the first 2 strings. As such, for today's lesson, I'm just going to talk about the notes on the first 2 strings of the guitar in FACGCE tuning. So as I've said before, we want to know the notes of C major and where they are on the guitar. So if you don't remember the notes of C major, they are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. If we know the notes of C major on the lowest 2 strings of the guitar, this will allow us to build chords and chord progressions that don't sound so random. And if we're playing diatonic to C major, this also means that we can apply concepts that we've learned from standard tuning, such as diatonic functions. If you don't know what a diatonic function is, please see my video on that. Okay, let's study the bass notes on the lowest string of the guitar, F. Fortunately for us, memorizing the notes of the first string is extremely easy because F is just a half step down from E, and E is our lowest note in E standard. So basically, if we know all of the notes of E standard, all we have to do is shift them down a half step and we'll know what they are in this tuning. But if you don't know the notes, then here are the notes that are diatonic to C on the lowest string. The open note is an F. On the 2nd fret, we have G. On the 4th fret, we have A. On the 6th fret, we have B. On the 7th fret, we have C, which is our home pitch. On the 9th fret, we have D. On the 11th fret, we have E. And on the 12th fret, we have F again, and the scale just repeats. To clarify that for you guys one more time, here's a visualization. Please memorize where these notes are. Okay, now let's look at the notes of C major on the 2nd lowest string of FACGCE. In this case, this is A. And fortunately for us, just like in E standard, the A note is exactly the same. So if we know the notes of the A string in E standard, then we know the notes of the A string in FACGCE. But if you don't know the notes of the A string, then here are the notes diatonic to the key of C. So the open note is A. On the 2nd fret, we have B. On the 3rd fret, we have C. On the 5th fret, we have D. On the 7th fret, we have E. On the 8th fret, we have F. On the 10th fret, we have G. And finally, on the 12th fret, we have A again. So if you're going up an octave, continuing on to the 14th fret and onwards, that pattern will just repeat itself. Also, if you're having trouble memorizing the bass notes, one tip that I use is to have a few reference points to look at. So for me, I usually try to start by memorizing the notes that are on the dots of the string, and then I try to figure out the notes that aren't on the dots afterwards. So here we know that this is C, D, and E, and if I want to find F, I know that F is just a half step up from E, so I'll fill that detail in, and then we go up to G, and then finally A on the 12th fret. So that's a pretty easy way to do it, but I would recommend that you go through all of them and really try to memorize them. Before I wrap things up today, I just want to show you guys 2 examples to give you guys an ear for what I've taught you guys today. For this first example, I'll play some arpeggios where the bass notes are going to be the notes of C major, and the rest of the notes that I choose will be notes based off of the open tuning sound. So this should give you guys a good ear for the notes of C major contrasted against the notes of FACGCE. It sounds like this, and I'm playing on the C note of the 3rd fret on the A string. Alright, moving to the next example, I'm going to show you guys a concept where I play a chord and I change the bass note every bar. In this case, my bass notes will be D, A, G, C, and F. So let's hear that example. Alright guys, so those are 2 examples of me doing things related to the notes of C major as bass notes in FACGCE tuning. I encourage you guys again to at least memorize the notes of C major on the lowest 2 strings of FACGCE, so on the F string and the A string. Ideally, you would want to memorize them all on every string, but that's not necessarily too practical. And at the bare minimum, if you want to memorize as little as possible, at least memorize where the bass note is for the key center. So in this case, on the 7th fret of the low F string. That's C. Okay guys, so there you have it. That's the first lesson on writing in FACGCE. Please make sure to tune in again soon, as there'll be other parts to this lesson coming shortly. Anyways, if you liked this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon page, where for $1 a month, you guys will have access to some bonus content like extra guitar tabs, notes, essays, chord diagrams, and possibly some future videos. Also, if you were confused about anything, have any questions, or want to just study things in more depth, please consider hitting me up for a private Skype lesson. There's a link to my email address in the description below. If that doesn't interest you, that's okay, but please come back for next week's video, because this one was just part 1 of a multi-part series on FACGCE tuning. So anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye. For instance, one thing I notice with people who compose in alternate tunings relying mostly on their ear or noodling is that this stuff